Me going. We have slides. For those of you that know me, and there's probably a few out there, and the colleagues that I have in the room know I hate them. You guys will get access to these afterwards. If I get through them, great. If I don't, because we're having conversations and you guys are asking me good questions, I would rather do that. My ask here is that I will go through these. Normally I tell folks, interrupt me. Please do. Stop me, raise questions. I'm blinded by the lights, so it's not going to be easy for me to see hands, but I will do my best to leave room for questions at the end. Thank you all for being here. I understand it's been quite a challenge for folks to get into the city, to get into the hotel, to get parking, etc. So again, thanks folks for being here. The other thing is you see Amazon people who are here. I believe we've got, what, orange lanyards on? The folks you see with orange lanyards, we're getting some feedback, we okay? Please do stop them. If there is something that you don't get, there is some lingering question in your mind, stop anyone in the hall. There's a lot of us that are here. It's our job to take care of you guys as customers, prospects, partners. So take advantage of those folks. We're here. We're locked down. We're not going anywhere for the next 2 days. So with that being said, this is effectively AWS 101. For those that have been through something like this, again, you probably have some questions that are keyed up from the last time you saw or heard it, but everybody else that's in the room, start thinking right now, I'm going backwards here, to have your questions ready. So the first part of this, how many folks in the room, if I can see by a show of hands, have an Amazon.com account where you buy stuff or your spouse buys stuff and it shows up in your house? All right, so that's sort of the typical thing. I get the text throughout the day and I go, I didn't know that I ordered that and it'll be there tomorrow. So the real first question is, how did Amazon.com, which we all kind of know and understand and typically love, and I'd usually ask the other question, which is how many of you are Prime members? So hopefully we're there as well. There we go. How did we get into this business? The misnomer that a lot of people have is Amazon runs a big e-commerce business, which means that it requires a lot of infrastructure to run it, especially during the holiday time of the year. And for the rest of the year, there's a lot of excess leftover infrastructure. And hey, let's see if we can rent that stuff out. That is not the case. That's not how the business came to be. The history of this, and we'll kind of go through some slides in it, what's AWS, really started with the CEO of the company, Andy Jassy, who will be here this week. He will speak, and if you get a chance to hear him, take advantage of it. It's not something that comes around very often. And Andy, going back in the 2006 days, was set up as a shadow to Jeff Bezos to solve problems, to learn, and to eventually move into a leadership role with the company. And one of the challenges that came up was the fact that AWS, or Amazon, .com was growing. It was one of the success stories out of the .com days. It was about a $4 billion company at the time, but we were running into the challenges that every company has, which is around infrastructure. Developers want to develop, and to grow the retail side of our business, a lot of it was development. So if you want to put a shopping cart in, or you want to put thumbnails in, or you want to change something that's in the website, it's all code that's got to be developed. Developers need infrastructure. Developers are spending too much time getting infrastructure. And every time a group did this, another group was doing it, and another group was doing it, and there were no economies of scale. So what was happening is one of the throttling factors for Amazon.com was infrastructure. The customer demand was ready to take us from $4 billion to a much bigger number, which is now somewhere around $100 billion since that time frame, but infrastructure was holding us back. We were also taking the platform, the e-commerce platform, and there were other companies that wanted to use the platform. So we had to, again, develop the capability for them, and we had these limitations. So going back to what Teresa said this morning, these were these limiting factors that were holding Amazon.com back, and we fixed it through what we now call cloud services, which was to initially start to deliver some storage and capabilities internally that eventually grew into services that we now know as EC2 or EBS or S3. And they started to put it out primarily for the development community, and it's now grown into what we know as AWS today. So again, questions around that, queue them up, have them ready. So in the 10 years since that inception of putting out those first web services, which was primarily S3, simple storage service. It's a massive object store on the web. You set up an account, you set up a bucket, and you put objects in the bucket. The pictures of my wife and kids and videos, any of those things, I put them into my S3 bucket. If I want to share them with somebody, every object in that bucket has a web address. I can send it to you in a link. Think about how that's very similar to a lot of the boxes that are out there. A lot of them run on an object store, and many of them leverage S3 as an example of that. So going back to what sets it apart, so A, the time frame. This is not something that we felt compelled that we had to get into because our business model was threatened and we better get in the cloud business. We didn't call it cloud back then. Our name is not cloud, our name is Amazon Web Services. And again, it's all around web services, APIs. You can call it cloud, that's great, but again, not even into our name. The depth and breadth over the years. Again, I've been here a little over 5 years, 4 months, Z, but who's counting, right? 70 plus services. And a service would be a product. So when you go into Amazon Web Services, you create an account, you are presented with a bunch of services. I need some compute, EC2. I need storage, EBS or S3 or relational database. There are 70 plus services that are out there today. So I'm going backwards here. So also the pace of innovation that's happened here, we measure new releases, new products, new capabilities. And I don't think I have a graph in here, but what you'll see is over time we continue to release more in a given year of new services and capabilities. And what's happened is over time, the pace of releases and capabilities has increased. It hasn't slowed down. It's been difficult. When I got here 5 years ago, we'd put out a new major release about once every month. I'd get an email, here's the new service. I would learn it, I'd get smart on it, go out, talk to my customers about it. Then it became every week, then it became every day, then it became multiple times a day. So it's very difficult for us internally. It's probably very difficult for you as customers to keep up with all the capabilities. And for those of you that are here in DC in the Public Sector Summit from DoD or civilian agencies, it makes it even more difficult to keep up with it. So to some degree, I will apologize because it makes our life tough, but I won't apologize because that's what keeps us ahead of the crowd is all these additional services that come primarily from the customers driving those things. The global footprint, I'm going to get deeper into that. That's my one big foot stomp, and those of you, again, that have worked with me or see me around, if you don't understand what is Amazon Web Services Cloud, what is the footprint? When someone says, Mark, where's your data center? Where are your data centers? Where's your cloud? What is your cloud? If you don't understand that initial construct, the rest of the conversation for the next number of days or weeks or years will be completely out of context. So if I get you guys at the end of time here, is this just counting me down or counting me up here? If I can get you guys through that, I will feel successful in understanding what that global footprint is. Pricing, 51 times it's been cut. At times, as a salesperson, I went, how in the world are we going to continue to do business if we continue to cut our prices? It's been 51, and there's probably going to be more to come. At the end of the day, what is this mission that we have? And you guys can read that as well as I can. So this is the heart and soul of it. Where is Amazon Web Services? Where is the cloud? Global footprint, 2 different types of circles represented up here. There's regions in orange that exist today. There are regions in green that are coming soon. Soon in Amazon terminology is typically within a year, if not much sooner than that. I know for a fact that some of these regions are already under significant construction. In North America, speaking to the public sector folks, that's the bulk of what you will be authorized to utilize are those that are in CONUS. The one up in Montreal, for folks, again, that are in my background in DoD, civilian agencies probably wouldn't leverage that, but the other 4 regions in Virginia, Northern California, and the other 2 regions that are co-located up in Oregon would be the ones, depending upon your workload, that you would be authorized to use. So let's kind of do a virtual Google map and let's drill down a little bit. We also have 50-some edge locations. These are small data centers that are there. This is our content distribution node. If we can cache data closer to the customer, things can happen faster. The numbers on the regions represent what we call availability zones. So hierarchically, think of a region at the top, A step down and indented over would be an availability zone. So we know there's 12 regions around the world, and there's 5 more coming. Every one of those regions has 2 to 5 availability zones for compute. Every one of those regions of compute has one, and in many cases, more than one data center. And that's all that you will typically hear from us talk about publicly. I will tell you that some of those availability zones have more than 5 data centers in them, where this is sensitive. So again, let's go down and let's pick a region. In fact, I'll just act as if this is what actually says it. In Ohio, there's another region that is starting construction now. And you'll see 3 on there for 3 availability zones. The other way to kind of think of this as a region is a pizza. The availability zones are the slices of the pizza. This is my Admiral story. They get it when I go through this way. That pizza will have 3 slices typically to start off, an availability zone. Each of those availability zones will have 1 or more data centers. Think of the data centers maybe a piece of pepperoni on each of the 3 slices. So here's the pizza. Coming into that region, Northern Virginia, Northern California, Ohio, Oregon, are multiple top-tier ISPs coming into these. Also coming into the transit centers that are in here. The availability zones are on separate floodplains. They're fault isolated. They're on different parts of the power grid. For those of you that are here in Northern Virginia, it's only Dominion Electric. So we're getting our power from Dominion, but we have an ability to separate that out, at least at the substation area. And oh, by the way, the pace at which we operate and grow in many of these areas, we don't have the ability to wait for the power provider to even build us substations. We build our own substations in many cases now. And you can look at the kind of traffic between the availability zones. And again, you see the 3 availability zone A, B, and C, the 3 slices of pizza in that analogy. Within those availability zones, this would be a mature region. When a region's first built, you're probably going to see 1 data center in each of those regions. And over time, when a data center reaches a certain set of capacity, we will have already started construction on building another one typically adjacent to it. So not a perfect analogy, but folks around here just to get a sense. If this were the Northern Virginia region, you could think of generally availability zone A might be Loudoun County. Availability zone B are those that are data centers that are in Prince William County, and C might be those that are in Fairfax County. Again, just for representative purposes to get a sense of that. The physical distance between these data centers is as far apart as we can get them, region to region, but yet still by the laws of physics, they are so close or close enough that they are less than 2 milliseconds apart, which means they are synchronous. So a region acts like a data center, but you have isolated components of that down into availability zones and individual data centers, again, to try to look at things to be as redundant as possible and to minimize your blast radius. So when something goes wrong, it's IT, things are going to go wrong, things are going to break. I want to be able to isolate that, control the blast radius, and have an ability to do backup. So what you see here is you as a customer start to make choices when you use AWS. Back into that, hey, I'm logging into the console. I want to use AWS. You go through a series of choices. Which region do I want to use? You decide that, not us. Which availability zone do I want to use? Do I just want to let Amazon just put it wherever they want within this region? Or do I want to pick region A or B or C? And oh, by the way, when Z picks region A, or I'm sorry, availability zone A in his console, and I pick availability zone A in my console in the same region, we are not necessarily operating in the same availability zone. Just kind of think about that for a second. My A is my A. It's not necessarily his A. Again, to start to abstract away, to also make sure that all of the zones are utilized as well. But what you want to do as a customer is to not put all your eggs in one basket in one data center. And there might be some customers out here who have done that before. It's not best practice. We cannot stop you from doing that. We can alert you that that's not a good thing to do. We can stand up here and tell you there's plenty of sessions that will talk about how to best architect. But if you need a server, something very simple that requires one server, Your best bet is to still, in most cases, not to put that in one data center, in one zone, in one region. If your server is a medium server, and that server costs 50 cents an hour, and I'm throwing out notional numbers, you are better off choosing 2 small servers that might be 20 or 25 cents an hour and spread your application across both of them, load balance them, and let the system know that if one goes down, for those of you that live in Northern Virginia, I didn't know what a derecho was until, 4 or 5 years ago, right? You guys remember that? 90-mile-an-hour straight line winds? We're talking about blowing diesel generators off of their blocks. It affected us. And for those customers that were in one data center that might have had that diesel generator powering them or supposed to power them, you were affected. For those customers that were operating in multiple data centers, 2 or more, they were not affected or were much less affected in that. So again, understanding a region, and again, this is the foot stomp and how these things are set up and the connectivity that's between them. Every data center within a zone is connected to all the data centers in its zone, and it is also connected back to the transit center. And these are redundant connections that's in there. This is a lot of infrastructure. You're going to see that in a second. Scale matters. So again, if an availability zone were to go down, you were still good. Why do we do this? Right? The legacy model for most of my customers is I've got a production data center in Norfolk, and I've got a backup data center in San Diego or China Lake or wherever it may be, right? And I would say most companies and most government folks still operate that way. Production's here, backup DR Coop is 250, 500 miles away. I don't know if I'm hitting something here. The reason is within that region, again, less than 2 milliseconds. Cross country, 74 milliseconds. I'm out of sync. I have to start to make choices, as you can read through here. Again, I'm not sure why this is going forward, holding it out, as to how I want to set things up. I'm going to run production on the East Coast, and I'm going to run backup on the West Coast. I have to decide when am I going to do backups, what's my RTO or RPO for those that have to deal with that stuff, what's my recovery time objective, and what's my recovery period objective, how much am I willing to lose if things go down. You don't have to make those decisions when you operate in the previous model, which was referred to as high availability. Doesn't mean that you can't. You could operate in Northern Virginia and do sort of a traditional backup model in California or Oregon or somewhere else. But guess what? You're also not paying for that infrastructure in a backup model in the cloud until you turn it on. And maybe you're going to turn it on and test it once a quarter, once a month, once a year. Turn it on, turn it off. All you're paying for is what you're storing in your backups. This thing wants to keep going backwards. Maybe it's telling me to go forward faster. So let's dig into an availability zone, just a different way to look at this. Again, 33 zones worldwide, spread across those 12 regions. Each availability zone has 1 or more data centers. Some have more. Again, you can get a sense of these. Start to do some of the math in your head here. A data center is typically 50 and sometimes over 80,000 servers. We could do 100. We're increasing a blast radius. That's a business decision that was made on behalf of the customers. What's the right size that's big enough that allows us to do economies of scale, but yet doesn't put all customers eggs into one basket? So that's the number that we've decided. It's not 55 or 56 or 80. It's in that range is what you're going to see. So again, 12 regions times 33 zones times 1 or more, in some cases 5, times conservatively 50,000 servers. You start to get to a scale at which is what people refer to as hyperscale cloud computing. What's the impacts of hyperscale cloud computing? Do we hyperscale CSPs, cloud services providers, do we go and buy OEM hardware now? No. We can't. It's too expensive. It's general purpose. It needs to do everything for everybody. We need a server that just does one specific thing. So we have equipment, routers, servers, switches that are built just to support and do a job in the cloud. And if I can go custom build an IT piece of equipment for 1/10 of the cost of the best one that's out there from an OEM vendor, and I've got software that can run it, even if 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 fail, then I'm still in a much better position. So again, the scale here matters. And it matters in many different ways in terms of security. It requires automation. You can't have people running around trying to do traditional security. I'm not sure what's going on with this thing. If we want to take it off and I can just give you a thumbs for a go forward, that's fine. Let's go forward. All right, so that's the regional construct piece. Let's get into what's in the product itself. This is just a construct of what's in here. And I would ask you to look at this and go, okay, what's Amazon Web Services? What do they have in their bag? What's in their cloud? Let's go bottom up. Infrastructure in green, I just talked about. That's the infrastructure piece. If you don't know what it is, where it is, how it's operated, how it's segregated, and oh, by the way, back into that region piece of it, just so people understand, we don't move your data from one region to the other. A region is a security boundary for your data. When you've chosen a region, your data stays within that region. So just understand that, and again, something to keep in mind when you're having discussions around cloud. Core services. What's the first thing I really have to have when I go to the cloud typically? Got to have some compute, got to have some storage, got to have some networking, maybe some databases. Those are the products you're going to have in here. I got to have security capabilities to make it work. And then from there, I can start to build up other specific products and verticals out of it. But without that foundation in the green, blue, and red, you cannot do the things that matter today that start to get into deeper analytics, big data, IoT, and then to have the application marketplace again, which Teresa alluded to this morning, and I may talk about that a little bit. Go ahead. All right, so just another way to look at it. This is very similar to logging into the console. Each of those icons represents a product or service that's in here. So again, you see in green at the bottom, you pick your region, you pick your zones. In blue, you pick which basic services you want to use. In red, there are capabilities that you may want to enable or turn on. So for example, in the red area, around security compliance, you'll see a little bit more about this. If I want to turn on monitoring and logs, you click a button to enable it. Because, oh, by the way, in the cloud, everything is an API call. I have an ability to have a virtual sort of VCR version of everything that happens in the cloud. I just have to enable it. And all those logs, you then tell it, where do I want to put it? We think a great place to put it's in an S3 bucket. And then put some nice partner analytical tools on top of it to look for the needle in the haystack that you have. But you can go back at any point in time and see who did what, when, and how. This is the automation piece of it that you have to have at the scale at which we operate. Go ahead. So let's dig into some of those core features. Again, in blue here, compute. Amazon's product name is EC2, Elastic Compute Cloud. There are, 40-some different instance types today. It keeps growing. And then they're in these different families that you see. So do I need a general purpose server? We call them M3s. Do I need some that are memory optimized or IO optimized? So again, back to, can I go to a vendor, an OEM vendor, and order a memory optimized type of hardware? It's very hard to do that. So when we go have our servers built for us and work with the partners like Intel, we get the right size chip, the right size memory. It's built to do just that job. It gives you options that you pick. So again, you pick where, you pick which type of compute. Each of these different computes that are in here, there's probably 5 or 6 different types of general purpose compute. Every one of them is a different price point. 2 cents an hour, 10 cents an hour, 50 cents an hour, they'll vary. On the storage side, you've got options. On the relational database side, what we call relational database services, RDS, we take on a little bit more responsibility for managing that relational database for you. And then on the auditing side, again, these are capabilities you want to turn on, everything from getting dedicated hardware security modules in the cloud that you can utilize. Go ahead. So my first foot stomp was regions and zones, the infrastructure, sort of knowing where things are. And hopefully you guys have a general sense of where and how big and what. The next piece of it to understand, the typical will come up here again. This is public sector. I'm assuming we have folks out there that work within the federal space, is security. It's going to come up in every meeting that I've ever done. And sometimes the meetings go like this: hey, come on in here, Mark, and talk to us because we understand you guys are really cheap. And we're under budgetary constraints. And oh, by the way, I've heard that I can do things faster and be more agile in the cloud, but I'm very concerned about security. Over time, not in one meeting, 2, 3, 4, 5 meetings, in some cases many more, some of them very deep, the tone of the conversation will change to the number one reason why I'm going to do this is I now have the ability, very specific words, if I operate and I architect properly, to operate in an environment that is more secure than what I have today in my on-premise environment. Just by going to AWS does not by default make you more secure than what you have today. There are people that can operate in ways that we would never want them to operate in the cloud. So there's plenty of stories out there, but someone left their keys out there, someone left things in public. You wouldn't do that, right? There are ways to try to mitigate that, but at the end of the day, to this piece of it, this is a shared responsibility model that in many ways is no different than what you probably do today. Understand from Amazon or any CSP that you ever talk to or either internal, that dotted line across the middle, I'll call it the line of demarcation. You need to know where that line is. What does Amazon do? What do we take care of? What has been documented? What is going to be in a FedRAMP package that you can inherit? And there's really, it should be a gray area in there because there are certain security controls for folks that work in that world that are shared. It isn't just a hard line. One control might have 5 things that we are responsible for and 5 things that you are responsible for. You've got to understand that. But there are things above that line of demarcation that you have the responsibility for. It's your job. Again, we're going to give you best practices in some of the other sessions. You're going to see some tools today that will take care of a lot of that for you, but you still ultimately own that responsibility for the things that you have to do as an end customer. We're going to give you really good tools to set up your network security through things like a VPC, virtual private cloud, to set up the security, access control through identity and access and management tools and capabilities, but you have to do that. And then ultimately, whatever applications you run on top of that, we don't know. Again, just to give you a sense of insight, if you're a customer of ours, let's say it's one of my old Navy customers, I can go into a system, I can look up your 12-digit account ID, and I can see what your billing is. They're using so many hours of EC2, EBS, and their bill last month was $1,000. I have no idea what you're operating on that server and in that storage. No one in the company has access. That's up to you. I don't know whether they're running SAP or SharePoint or Alfresco. I have no idea. That is on you. You have to operate that. And ultimately, that entire piece of it, which I think may come up here. Let's try this. Let's go ahead and go to the next one. We'll get to it here in a second. But that entire piece of that, the last slide from top to bottom, is what is effectively going to go into an ATO package. That's where you're going to inherit things that are part of FedRAMP or part of a DoD SRG or part of an ATO package that's been done by an individual service, but there is a line of demarcation for things that you are responsible for. These are some of the capabilities that are built into it from a security standpoint. Again, the top left, and there may be a slide in here, these 30 different compliance certifications and accreditations that have been out there. We don't do one-offs. At the end of the day, Amazon manages, I think it's about 1,800 specific security controls today that every customer gets the benefit from. So whether you are from the Department of X.mil.gov, or if you're my 12-year-old daughter running a Minecraft server, you guys get access to the exact same security capabilities. There is no distinction. So understand that it's up to you to enable and use those services as well. Go ahead. So again, back, and I've kind of touched on this a little bit around the networking tools, encryption tools. These are all there for you to use. I can't force you, although it's pretty much by default now, to utilize what's called an Amazon VPC or virtual private cloud. I can't force you to enable an Amazon web application firewall or to utilize a third-party web application firewall. These are best practices that you should do. Again, using Amazon Identity and Access and Management, you should do this. If you want an accreditation in the federal space, you will use this. Otherwise, you're not going to get an ATO. I can tell you that for some of these services. But ultimately, leveraging a lot of these and the same things that you've been doing in years past will get you to that point of ultimately getting your ATO. To me, and hopefully to many of you guys, that's the panacea at the end of the day, is get the ATO, maybe starting with an IETT, IATO, and ultimately a final ATO. Go ahead. And then this is the, I call it the sort of the NASCAR slide for accreditations. Because we have to go out and be PCI DSS compliant, or because we have a certain ISO compliancy or CGIS or FISMA, it doesn't mean it's just for that community of users. If we have made a decision to implement a security control because a customer base wanted to have it, everybody gets to leverage and use that. It's been built into the system now. Go ahead. All right, so a little bit of change gears. I hit infrastructure. touched a little bit on security, but the big piece from security, understand and drill into it as you guys continue your cloud journey. It's a shared security, shared responsibility model. Just because you go to a cloud provider, any cloud provider, by default does not take you away from having to continue to do your job. We just want to give you really good tools to do it and make it easier. So now into what's happening in the space, and we are getting close, for those that know what this is, to seeing the 2015 one from last year comes out now. And I don't know if we've got any Gartner folks in here. I know Lydia Young, who does this, is local, and she may come to the event. And I know they're getting close to putting out the update to the quadrant. But going back over the years, you can see that how things have matured, who were the players in the space going back into 11. They put the top 15 vendors that play in the cloud space, infrastructure as a service, in here. The good part that I like is we've always been in sort of that most enviable space up to the upper right-hand side of it. And there's a couple quotes that have come out of here that are interesting. So this is going back to, I think, the 14 model. And this was the quote. So when we saw this, we thought, wow, that's interesting, that out of the 14 other companies that are in the Gartner Quad, Amazon has 5 times more compute capacity. This goes back to that, where is the cloud, what is it, regional construct, how big is it, and why do you care that it's a lot, right? That size and scope and scale allows us to do a lot of things on your behalf, not just lower prices. It also means that we have to operate security in a very automatic manner, and the security people that we have to operate it are the best in the world. And I feel very comfortable and confident in saying that because many of them came from the space or places where you guys worked. The security and compliance organization, of which a lot of them are here in Northern Virginia area, came from 3-letter agencies or DoD in many cases, even up to the SES level, and many or most of them are still carrying active clearances today. That matters. They understand what it means for security and cybersecurity for the folks, I believe, in this room who are here today. So let's do a little bit of a flash forward. This was 2011 to 14. So 15 came out. I was ahead of myself. 16 is what we're waiting for. And they actually, although it's not easy to see in here, they actually had to change the scale of the slide. So although the distance between us and others looks similar, the scale has actually changed. And this is sort of the proof of that. And again, the names have changed as to who's in there, but go ahead and hit the next piece of it. So from 14 to 15, it went from 5 times more than the other 14 to 10 times more. So I'm waiting with bated breath to see if that pace continues. Does it go back to 5? Does it do whatever? Bottom line is it's an enviable position to be in. At the end of the day, there's probably only going to be a handful of what I would refer to as hyperscale cloud providers. This is one reference point to get a sense of who's out there, their relative place in the market space. Go ahead. So what does this all mean? And I'm not sure if you can see the colors and what they mean up there, but blue is SaaS and the growth over time. Salesforce.com, Concur, Adobe Tools, the top software companies in the world are now moving their applications. And again, I have a heavy software sales background. I wanted to always come in and sell that perpetual license to you as an end government customer. That's changing now. The model is absolutely moving over to a SaaS model. The nice part about what's in blue is that many of them are here today, these ISV partner companies, and many of them operate the infrastructure under their SaaS offering is on AWS. The part in orange is general public cloud. Typically, that's infrastructure as a service and platform as a service. That's the sweet spot of where AWS plays, and you can see the growth of that. And again, over time, the numbers that have been coming out of the industry are starting to play this out as true. But then the gray area and the yellow area is really what I would say is our biggest competition. It's the way things have been done. It's the on-premise, and it's the private cloud of it. And you see where that is generally heading. It does not go away. I don't think it will ever go away. And I would say that in this room, this is not specific to federal, it probably won't get as small of a percentage as it will in the rest of the world. But it's definitely heading in that direction, that it is moving towards a commercial cloud-first environment where there are things that by exception will stay over time in an on-premise environment for whatever reason. Some of that might be because it's a mainframe or it's Solaris. I don't even count those in there. Other things that for a variety of reasons will still stay on-premise. Over time, people will continue to get more comfortable with moving more off-premise into their virtual private clouds within the commercial cloud space. Go ahead. So I think I'm getting down here to the end. Talked a little bit about partners. We will generally bucket our partners, and there are many hundreds, if not thousands of them that are here today running around in one or two places. You're a systems integrator, partner, generally speaking. You see a couple of them that are up here, Accenture, Infosys, Capgemini, or you are a software partner, an ISV, a Microsoft, a Trend Micro, an SAP, et cetera. The other side of it that, again, coming from the software background that I do, that I think is potentially more disruptive than people just going to the cloud, architecting something in an Amazon region and operating it there and getting significant cost savings, agility, and security by doing it. That's important. That's all good. That's the bulk of the conversation. I think the more impactful piece is actually what can happen through the AWS marketplace, which there's now, this is probably out of date, I think the number's up over 2,700 some products that are in there that you can acquire through the cloud. So as easy it is for me to go in and pick my region, pick my zone or zones, pick my size and type of servers, and start to allocate storage to go with it, eventually I'm going to put a software application on it. But what if I can get that software application right through that same interface? Maybe I don't even know what I'm looking for. I just know that I need a security firewall, or I need a business intelligence tool, or I need an analytical tool. I go into the marketplace, I search for what I want, and in many cases I'm going to see multiple options. And when I pick the one I want, or the two that I want, maybe I want to try and compare those, I'm going to pay for them one place through Amazon in the same model, typically by the hour or some other utility model. That's going to have a significant impact on where a lot of your cost is. How many of you guys have been buying software licenses, perpetual licenses, through ELAs, those sorts of things, where at the end of the day you've got true-up periods to deal with, or you're really ever using what you want? How easy is it to change and compare other vendors? The marketplace is going to have a significant impact on the way IT is done, I think as big or more than just the basic cloud itself. Go ahead. And then I believe this is the kind of wrap up. Again, you can get some quotes that some of them you had seen earlier this morning. Cost, go faster, be more secure. I'd like to move that more secure up to the top is when I know that we've got a mature conversation and discussion that's going on. So I think we may wrap up, and then we've got some time here to do some questions. Go ahead. Let's see if that's it. Yep, that's it. We're not going to make Paul do a demo today. We'll save that for later. If somebody wants to get it, you can get us in the hall. So I am going to try to step down here. If I have to pick on somebody, I'll do that. Ugh, old knees. Questions? Please don't be bashful. Somebody step up. Speak up. Fire away.
Yeah, so any takeaways from what happened last month in Sydney?
Yeah, so what he's referring to, and there's parts of it that I'm allowed to talk about, there's parts of it that I know enough to talk about, which is probably not as much as I should, and then there's other parts of it that are generally available to the public. So what he's referring to is, in its own way, sort of similar to what I talked about in Ashburn, where there was an act of God, if you will, that took out some components of the power grid there in Sydney, where we have a region, and portions of that region were down and affected customers. I don't know all the details of it. What I think I can generally say is that the duration of that event was relatively short. I think it was, the customers that were affected, I believe it was less than days or day, if not hours. That's still bad. I mean, we don't want customers to experience that situation. The details of that, and I guess this is sort of the good part, is when these situations occur, and assume they are going to occur, right? We can't predict what Mother Nature is going to do. Always architect in the worst case scenario, be prepared for it. But when you go out, there is a service health dashboard on aws.amazon.com, of which you'll be able to go in there and drill down deeply to see which services were affected in which region today, right now live, which ones are red, green, yellow, with notes. And when there's a significant event like that, you'll typically get a fairly in-depth after-action report that will go through and detail it. And when those things have occurred, not only are they bad events, right? You don't want to have it happen because it's affecting somebody's business and somebody's livelihood. The good part about those things is they're going to happen. They're going to happen to us and other hyperscale cloud providers every time we learn something out of it. And again, many things out of this event in Ashburn a couple years ago, there's been significant changes that we have made just to the way that we do backup power generation. Why should we feel like Caterpillar will tell us what is acceptable power coming out of a generator to power our servers? That's a decision that we need to make. So we've changed some of those things. We learn. as we push out the outer limits of commercial cloud. So again, that's not as specific as I think you probably want, but the information out there to get in the details is there. I just don't know it off the top of my head. Yes, sir, ma'am?
Yes, I would like to ask, I work for a nonprofit sector in a country outside of the U.S., and what are some of the services that you can provide to, let's say, a nonprofit philanthropic sector in a specific country? How can you support them?
So
Thank you.
the not-for-profit business, we generally here just kind of refer to it as the .org world, right? Does fall under and is managed under our worldwide public sector team. And in fact, there was a lot of debate 4 or 5 years ago. Is there really any business here in these .orgs, these not-for-profits? Do they have money to do cloud? Do they have a cloud demand? Today, I believe that is by the number of accounts and programs and projects going on, if not our largest, one of our largest verticals within the public sector. And again, I think you may have even heard some of them this morning there. So, what can we do? I would say this is sort of a generic question for any customer starting out. You take the low-hanging fruit, do something that is perceived as low risk to you, and the first piece of it for the .orgs is get your public web presence out on the cloud. Get your web presence out there, and then look for that event. I hate to say you're going to play upon a catastrophe. And in a Red Cross example, the Red Cross web page typically runs here. When a catastrophe hits, it goes up the Red Cross, anything else like that. So be prepared to handle that. The last thing you want is a situation like that, and you're not able to handle capacity. Paul, is there something you want to inject here? Okay, I'm getting a countdown for 3 minutes. So I don't know if that answered the question, but I mean, is there anything more specific around what can we do? I mean, at the end of the day, you're like any other customer. You start off with the things that are easy, typically your web presence. Next, do I have storage requirements? The other thing that I like for the not-for-profit piece of it, I'm not sure if it's a world you play, is the disaster recovery world. A lot of different acronyms, humanitarian assistance, disaster recovery. There are capabilities that need to be ready to go when the next emergency hits. And you can't afford to buy that infrastructure, to have it pre-staged around the world and wait. But you can afford to stand up that infrastructure in a virtual manner and stop it in every one of those regions around the world. And that when the next tsunami hits or the next Zika virus hits or whatever it may be, and that infrastructure needs to stand up so people can communicate across countries, across organizations, collaborate, the cloud is a perfect environment to handle the HADR or whatever you'd refer to that sort of scenario. So we got another one? Yes?
Yes, you have mentioned that you build your own specialized hardware. Do you guys follow something like the Open Compute Project, or maybe you could touch on how you differentiate from, say, that or something like a converged solution like Nutanix?
Yeah, so again, an area that I probably can't get too deep into, there are other hyperscale cloud providers who aren't necessarily in the infrastructure as a service business, think Facebook, right? Who's very open about the fact that they have to do the same thing. They operate at this sort of a scale, and they do create their own specialized hardware, and they're very open about the recipe to build that. We are less open about the recipe to build that. And a lot of that's going to go back to the fact that our business model is not a Facebook model. It's all these people that are customers that are on that infrastructure. And the less that we have to share about that infrastructure, we would just look at that from a cybersecurity posture and go sort of less is more. Again, just to kind of play that, been here almost 5.5 years. I've never been into an Amazon data center. I have no business walking into your data center. I came from a customer meeting last week that was very proud of the fact that they had just walked through someone else's cloud data center. And when could they go do that with us? And this was a 3-star flag equivalent. I'm going to get caught off and end it at this. It's not easy telling an SES or a 3 or 4-star, sir, you can't come walk through our data center. And ultimately, you have to explain to them that is for their protection. Because if I let you in, I've got to let her in, and I've got to let him in. And I'm increasing a security risk, and we're just not going to do it. We take our people inside the company, and we break them, this is a simple security policy, into 2 groups. Actually, 3 groups, guys like me that are not part of either one of them. There are people that have physical access to our data centers. They've got a badge, they can walk in. They're part of the people that swap out hard drives and do things like that. And then there are people that have logical access to the data centers. They're operating the software that makes it all run. Those are 2 completely separate entities within the company operating on different networks, and the 2 shall never cross paths. Go back to where you come from and ask your IT people, and there's probably some of you in the room today. Does your badge allow you to walk into the data center? And can you then go back to your desk and log in to the underlying infrastructure? That's a security risk. We don't do that. So I think that I'm getting the plug. I'm going to stay up here until they kick me out. If folks have other questions, we'll stay here to answer them. Thank you very much.